Awesome. All right, I'm now going to hand it off to Christian to talk about not Xcode Cloud, Xcode Predictive Completion, the AI stuff. Yeah, over to Christian.
All right. Well, he keeps saying talk, but it's not going to be a talk. It's going to be a demo / interactive open session thing. I have no idea what I'm going to say. And I don't know what I'm going to get, more importantly. I gave this talk demo internally at Baloo, and we saw different things depending on what happened. Let's put it that way.
And which way the wind was blowing.
Yeah, exactly. That's very dark, isn't it? What's happening there?
It's a horror movie. It's not just me. It's Halloween.
Talk. It's basically up to you how interesting and how much we're going to go through here, because I really want this to be open and interactive, lots of questions and suggestions and things you're curious about. And I'm going to hustle Zach around a lot because he needs to pass the mic around to say whatever. But essentially, I wanted to give a little bit of a demo around the new Xcode 16 predictive code completion, I believe it's called. And I've used it a little bit in my own personal projects. Well, you can't really help not to use it because it's sort of enabled by default. But I think it's, I've been trying to sort of use it, compare it a little bit to like things like GitHub Copilot, the regular autocomplete. And I think there's a few questions that pop up when I start to use it and based on the experiences I've seen. And that's where I really like to hear your opinions and insights as well. I certainly know that some people have some. I called this talk, is it ready for production? Because that's sort of a question we always like to ask. We did it with Swift UI, for example. I'm sure we do it for every iOS version that comes out. Is it ready for us to use this? Even with Swift UI, yes, it's always ready. Like, it's a tool you can use. Does it have bugs? Does it have flaws? Is it perfect? Of course not. But it's a tool you can use. And in that term, like, yes, it is ready for production in the way that if you choose to use it, now this is a development tool, so it's going to be a little bit different. You're not going to see anything out in the field that is caused by this unless it's, actual bugs. But I think it's a valid question that, yes, every time you ask this question, is it ready for production? I think the answer is yes, if you choose to, right? And I would love to hear your inputs around this, Xcode code completion, but also like sort of AI coding in general. That's sort of the topic here. And try to understand, is it ready for production? Like, is it useful? Is it helpful? Is it in the way? Does it give us good code? Does it give us bad code? And ultimately, if everyone starts to use this, what do we end up with? Because we had a conversation at here earlier today around this, and ultimately these all work on sort of large language models like ChatGPT and that kind of thing, or that is also a large language model. And if like really, really basically how it works, it sort of tries to find, you put in something like a prompt or some code, and it tries to figure out, okay, what is the most common thing people have or when I see this, and then it tries to give you that back. And what I think we might end up with if everyone starts to use it is, well, large language models and these prediction engine things, they are going to give the average of what is most common. And so ultimately what we're going to end up with is code that is average. And I guess the question is that average at a high enough level that it's actually, again, useful? Or are we going to continue down a path where ultimately we reach a point where it's just not useful because it only gives out code that isn't really applicable or relevant or good? Yes, garbage in, garbage out. Or in this case, good questions in, rubbish out. Right. So basically, I'll give a little bit of a show up, but please just talk whenever you feel the impulse to ask a question, you want to try something, you think, okay, what happens if you do this? Please just speak up. I'm not going to do a talk. This is for you to be curious and explore with the tools that we have.
I'm curious how many people have been played with the predictive code completion yet?
Stealing my first question out of my mouth. So who has experience with not just Xcode, but like, Copilot, whatever, these tools in general, and like, is anyone happy to just share their first sort of impression or experience? Zach can go first, of course.
Sure. The microphones, that makes sense. I have been using predictive code completion, and I mean, all you can really compare it to, in this context anyway, is the previous, like, essentially autocomplete. And I feel like half the time it's better than what that would have given, and the other half the time it's not better. And I spend a lot of time during my day now thinking about, is this a net positive? Because I'm not an AI skeptic. Like, I actually have some pretty good uses for it and other things, but I just don't know if the mental overhead of like trying to work out if this thing is imagining something, which seems to happen a few times a day, is worth it. But then sometimes it does like really good, like you've got an enum case or whatever, and it's like you're mapping to another type that essentially has all the same cases, and it can kind of do that automatically, and that's really nice. And it's like, oh cool, that just saved me 20 seconds of my life. But then, in the very next thing I'm writing, it's like, okay, function return true, and then it's like trying to add to that, and it's like, no, that's the whole expression. Because that's, I guess, the LLM thing of, I've always got something to add to this. I've always got something to say, when it doesn't have the brains to kind of know when to stop. Whereas I feel like the old autocomplete, while it's not very intelligent, it at least knew kind of when it needed to start autofilling something. I don't know. I'm on the fence. I'm happy to open a discussion about this, like Christian is, but I do wonder if it's a net positive, if it's kind of 50% good, 50% bad, which seems to be how it feels.
Yeah.
What was that last thing? Have a microphone.
Oh yeah, we have. Yeah.
Yep. I'll just pass it to you. Sorry.
So I don't have experience with Xcode's predictive code completion, but I do have experience both as a user and managing other people who use GitHub's Copilot. And for the using it myself, it's kind of very similar. The best benefit it brings is not doing whole things for me, but forcing me to write comments that describe what I want. And maybe I take its suggestion, maybe I don't. But ultimately, I've also there run into the exact same problem where it hallucinates something, which then kind of gets in the way of showing the actual autocomplete. So it's, I don't know. I leave it turned on, so I guess it wins.
Anyone else? First impressions, Neil?
Yeah, we've just started using it. They did leave out the you've got to go and pull down the extra component, which is a couple of gig, whatever. But in really simple stuff, as you'd expect, like writing unit tests. Okay, I'm down to this point in the unit test. I now know that the unit test has got, I've now got a structure or a class. I now want to write unit tests to make sure that the values are right. It's very good at writing. However, start typing, put in something in the what you want to test, and it auto-completes very well. But then it starts suggesting, for instance, tests on properties that don't exist in the structure. So it's clearly having a bit of hallucination. So, but as far as if you just want to get some quick stuff going, but expect it to go, nah, sorry, that's not, you can't compile that because there's no such field. Why did you suggest it? Anyway.
All right. Well, so based on what you two shared, like, do you find it helpful then, or is it a little bit more in the way than?
So far, it's helpful, but you've got to be prepared to go delete those last 6 suggestions because they're just rubbish. But the previous 3 were really good. So it is definitely quicker to get simple stuff done quickly, but you do have to very quickly remove junk that it inserts. Yeah.
I think similarly, where one of the cases where I find it incredibly, well, not incredibly, where I find it more helpful is where I'm, especially when you're doing repetitive tasks, the enum example is, or variations of it. In Copilot's case, because it has context of your surrounding projects, it can or the surrounding project, it can make suggestions that make those mappings like they're consistent. So it's like maybe everything, all the other enum values are like just camel cased to make the key or whatever, except for one. It's like the QA one ends up as QA instead of being turned into quality assurance, and it picks that up from your surrounding context. But otherwise, the exact same is like, I don't know if I'd trust it on a language without type safety.
I mean, the Swift assist may be way better. We don't know yet. It'll be far deeper understanding of both the language and your code. But so far, I mean, it's good, it's useful, but you do ditch a lot of its hallucinations. So
That's a good question, actually. How does it react to JavaScript where everything is valid? Is it able? Anyway, maybe let's not go down that road.
ChatGPT is pretty good at JavaScript.
Yeah.
It can be done. How good is it? I don't know.
All right, well, let's have a look. Is there anyone that hasn't seen it? Just to get a... Okay, that's a few. That's one. This is for you. What's the reason you haven't tried it, maybe?
I haven't actually done much coding in the last couple of months.
Fair enough, putting you on the spot there. That's good.
So you're in product.
So the long story short, in Xcode 16, Apple brought out what they call predictive code completion, and it's correct. Later on, they're gonna, later this year, which is about soon, they're gonna bring out Swift Assist that should be able to, as far as I understand, again, be a little bit more like ChatGPT, but with the inherent knowledge of all of Apple's and Swift's SDKs, and probably not your own code. Oh, it does upload your own code as well. But it's not stored in their service, as they say. But we're going to focus on the predictive code completion here. Let's give it a spin. So that is something they brought out in Xcode 16. It runs a large language model locally on your machine. I think the minimum requirement is an M1 machine with minimum 16 gigs of RAM, because it does take up a lot of memory to run all these calculations, I suppose it is. And as it says, like, it keeps your code private. It works when you're offline because it just runs locally. It doesn't send anything up to the cloud. And Xcode automatically downloads and updates the model as you go along. Question?
They are missing some extra bullet points on the bottom.
I'm sure they are.
You have to be running Sequoia to get predictive code. And once you install Sequoia, you can't run Xcode 15 at all.
Incorrect. Xcode 15 point...
No, we had 15.
Actually, yeah, no. No, you're right. You're right. I was surprised the other way. That Sonoma can run Xcode 16.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sequoia can't run 15.
That's correct. So, and that's obviously is what I'm running. Latest version of Sequoia and the latest version of, or probably the latest version of 16.1 beta. And as I said, when it should be enabled by default. So when you install that Xcode version and it pops up, what do you want to install these SDKs? You tick, iOS and whatnot. And then there's like a predictive code completion one at the bottom. It should be ticked. You install it. It will download about 2.2 gigabytes worth of data. And off you go. If you don't have it yet, you can double check going to components. You should be able to have this. You should be able to install it from here if you don't already have it. And likewise, again, it should be enabled by default, but if it's not, make sure to go into text editing, and then you can turn it on and off from in here if you would like to. If it's too annoying, that's why you turn it off until Apple forces you on you. So how does it work? I have a couple of personal projects that I used at the last demo. And it's really, really hit and miss, I find. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I find it much more stable now than when I displayed it about a month ago. But effectively, all it will do is, it's not even a glorified autocomplete, I think. It is much more about understanding, importantly, all of the Apple code, but also your code, and try to predict or suggest what you might be trying to achieve here. And there's a different feature we'll get into a bit later where you can tell it what you want, and then it will try to generate that based on comments. So a little bit towards the Swift Assist, but way, way simpler. And I found that works decently well if you know what you want and you just don't remember how to write it, or if you just want to add a modifier on something on SwiftUI. Predictive code works both on UIKit and SwiftUI, and in Swift, probably not Objective-C. I'm not actually sure. It's Xcode predictive. It should. Yep. But probably Swift only. I'm not actually sure. And so basically what it will do is as you write your code, let's say we want to, now I used this example last time, so I hope it works. We want to do a person struct. What you see, you will see both the normal autocomplete, that's like this, the drop-down menu. But what you see like sort of faded out text-wise behind is that's the prediction that it thinks you want. And as you see down here, it will say, press tab to insert this prediction. In this case, that's not quite what we want, so we can just do like this, and then you might start, okay, so what does a person have? Anyone? A name. Okay, so we'll do, oh, okay, so I got name, and then it suggests, okay, you probably meant name with as a string. I can tap to autocomplete, that's good. And then it starts, okay, well, it's a person. They usually have ages. Okay, that might be what it is. And it should be an integer. That seems reasonable. You just enter, it will guess again. What do we want? Okay, maybe email, sure. And then let's just see what it comes up with. All I do is just tab and enter. And so far, so good, depending on whatever app that now it gets dangerous. So here it actually, now it starts to suggest things from types I don't have, which might be fine. Like it might be what we want, but it is going beyond just the SDK and try to figure out, what do you want? And then even if you don't have that yet, for example, the agenda or the interests, we can do that later. So let's stop it here. Now, I'm actually curious. Let's see. I don't know.
It should be optional, yes. There are people who don't identify as having gen.
It should be an enum that has non-binary on the as an option, right? But let's see what it suggests. This could be very politically dangerous. But let's.
Sorry, so blame Apple.
Why don't you try the interest one?
Actually, I don't know if it's hooked up to my mic, but I typed an E, and already
It said no.
we said num gender string codable. Okay, let's see. Okay,
Ooh.
and now it suggests posts.
Wow.
Unknown. Valid, I suppose. And now, okay, fair enough. It suggests we can make a class file. It is kind of, it makes me think of the, when was it, with the iPhone 10 when they launched Face ID, and it was primarily, there was a problem when it was primarily trained on Caucasian faces, so it didn't register, for example, Asian or whatever, very well.
Yes.
Are we live streaming this? All good. But it's, I mean, honestly, if you wanted a person, this is quite helpful.
What you don't like, change it.
Yeah, exactly. Like we got some suggestions that we needed, and there were some things we don't need, for example.
One thing, when it came up before and it gave you like the array of interests,
Yep.
or whatever, does then that have an option where you can say, okay, expand interests, and then it would generate your class, or whatever from that, or a possible class it would generate from?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, so I guess what you're asking, well, let's use the gender line. Like what?
If it's suggesting something, you
Yeah.
think, well, it then should be aware of what that's going to be.
So what's being asked is, if it suggests a type you don't have, for example, is there a way to quote unquote refactor or create that type again, based on what it suggests. And I don't think there is currently, like you're not able to, and that's actually a topic we talked about when I presented this elsewhere, is there's no way currently to sort of, you might, if you use visual code, for example, it might have a few options, but there's no way here to say, okay, no, that's not quite what I want. What's the next suggestion? The only way is to, escape. I don't want that, and then perhaps try again, but it will likely try the same thing. Yeah, so you sort of work with the system and you get more specific in what you want, but there's no sort of way to sort of, figure out what did you mean by that, or what would be the next step. Or the alternatives. Yeah, that's a good question. Right, so for example, the this person one. So what I find quite useful is it's a great way for, it could be a great way for new developers to explore the APIs. We made the comparison that autocomplete is sort of, it's good for exploration and it's sort of helpful when you sort of know what you are looking for already. But sometimes this one, as in this example, like it will suggest things that show you basically how to do things. Like let's say I want it to be codable. What am I missing for it to be codable, right? And
It's not just suggesting syntactically stuff, it's actually semantic suggestion.
yeah, and as we talked about before, like where is the challenge here is, in order for this to really make sense, you still have to understand what it suggests you. And I think that's where we can end up in trouble, where, the common joke is like people copy paste things from Stack Overflow without really, like, this works, but I don't really know what it's doing. And I think we can end up in the same situation where a lot of people will, generate code that may work, but they don't actually, like, they use this to do their job for them without really understanding why. And I think that's what we at least had with, we still have it with autocomplete. Like you can see the list of options, but you still have to sort of understand, okay, if I'm doing a table view, this delegate function does this, and this is how I use it. It's just a tool to help you write it quicker, not write it for you. So I'd like to hear any thoughts on that sort of area. Go ahead. Yeah.
When we, as a company, were first deciding whether to,
Oh yeah, I'll just get the mic here.
when we as a company would, when the company I work for, the engineering leaders were deciding, do we want to allow Copilot's use? The consensus, and I kind of agree with it, is ultimately the person who submits a PR, in our case, is responsible for the code they're submitting. So whether, if Copilot did it or their cat mashed keys and autocomplete did it,
The one responsible for pushing it.
so it's important that people using it know what they're submitting, and then obviously code review. That's kind of a first thought, if anyone.
Yeah, and make that some manufacturer in the end connection in the net can
Let's skip the mic.
code to prevent you turning that feature on as well. If you particularly don't want anyone to use it, you can have it so it's not even possible.
Good thought. Pass it on to a tech team. Make sure yeah. Make when the new toggle for Swift assist comes along.
Make it a bit bigger. That's better, right? Yeah.
But what Patrick said sounds a lot like just like if you did copy and paste from Stack Overflow, you're still responsible for the code. You're not like, I found it online, it must work. That's no one's thinking like, or hopefully no one's thinking like that. Yeah.
I mean, it might work.
Everything online's true and none of it's AI generated, Neil.
All right. So what Neil suggested before was around testing, and I thought, can it actually, now that it's aware that we have a person class, we might just do a quick build. Can it auto-generate the test class based on the properties that is there? Like maybe person as a name is a little bit too, what's the word? Simple for it to understand, okay, this is that particular one, but let's give it a go. So let's do, in this case, no, but let's do, let's do person. We're creating a new person, and then expect. I probably have a hello world text from last. Yeah, right. So, but we can help it a little bit. Okay, so let's see next time. Okay.
That's exactly, that's what we're seeing. Good, rubbish, rubbish, rubbish.
Yeah.
Property.
So it's a really good example, right? Like it's
That's exactly, it's a reasonable thing to suggest, but it has no relationship to your actual code. And that's where it's hallucinating.
and I think what we found and talked about is it seems like I don't know, I have no facts about this, but it seems to very heavily weighted towards what you have just written. So for example, it's a good example here. So it said person name, good. Person age, fine. Person height, sure. Person weight, okay, that could be random, but it